Hell is real. I have seen it with my own eyes and I have heard it with my own ears. I considered myself a serious Christian, yet I found myself on my way to hell. So I was working in Japan at that time and I basically made up my mind to go live there and work there. I didn't plan to go back to France where I have grown up and studied, but I made a plan to go to Japan, live a life of abundance. I worked as an engineer and I was making plenty of money at that time. Life in Japan isn't as expensive as you'd think, and I was on my perfect plan to live a peaceful life of abundance. I made a few friends and I loved the place I worked at. Everything was perfect. One day I got approached by a guy at a train station. It was Takadanobaba station in Tokyo, on the Yamanote line, one of the busiest lines that goes around Tokyo. I was approached by a guy asking me, "Do you want to join in free Japanese classes as well as free meals?" It sounded really like a scam telling this story now, but I just said yes. I had nothing else to do, so please take my phone number. So I still didn't fully grasp what was going on. When I opened my phone and saw the message from this guy, the first message he sent me, I saw an image of a cross and I figured it was a Christian ministry. I was sent an invite to join on Sunday. Despite not believing or not being a believer, I was genuinely interested to join and listen to their message. Still to this day, I am not able to tell which denomination it was, but it was an underground church. It was in the basement of a building in Tokyo. There was a Japanese pastor preaching with very impressive charisma, which is a surprise. Japanese people tend to be shy and overpolite, though it was a genuinely nice person. There, they would invite strangers to join, mostly foreigners, people from China, Philippines. In the most part, it was Chinese students and Western tourists. I believe it was their attempt to spread the gospel to foreigners living in Japan. So I go to the address of the basement church on Sunday. The same guy from the train station takes my shoes and gives me slippers instead. I sit in, I listen to the pastor for about an hour. After the sermon or reading, we would pull out tables within the same room. Then we would have a free meal. Korean food for free, tteokbokki, onden, all for free. It was very generous and very nice from the people who just run this church. They never asked me for money or nothing. I think it was genuinely good Christians. They were working hard to spread the gospel. So yes, it was a Korean church in Japan with a Japanese pastor, but the owner was Korean. I went there a couple of times and this is where I met one of my best friends, to whom I still talk to sometimes. We call on the phone. When I was attending that church, I was still an unbeliever. I wouldn't really believe what the pastor would say, but I was still kind of interested to know what their message was about. But really, I wasn't serious about it. I wasn't committed and I was still living in sin. When Christmas came around, I went back to France for a few weeks to visit my family. And I was listening in my bedroom for a political podcast. And I found the motivation to actually go back to church so I can say to other people, at least I went there once. So I went to church once and actually ended up going there every Sunday. During that time, I was doing research on my side. I looked up the Shroud of Turin, read apologetics, etc. And I started believing Jesus Christ being the Son of God. I wanted to know if Christianity was a conspiracy theory, but at some point I just gave up my research because it was just a lot of evidence and I couldn't find anything really to say. I started reconsidering priorities. It was no longer about me living in Japan to go live a life of peace and abundance. I started thinking that I should go back to France to take care of my parents. I cannot abandon them. Even though they're not that old, I was thinking someone has to do it, right? I have a little brother, but I wasn't expecting him to do it, so I felt like I had to go back to France. So in my mind, the plan to actually commit to Japan wasn't looking as good as it used to be. I started thinking that it might not please to the Lord. It was no longer about me. It was more about committing to pleasing the Lord. So for work, I had a visa procedure ongoing, and I basically told the HR lady that I was no longer planning to take that visa to go back to Japan because I made up my mind to go back to France. A few days later, I got up super early, and because my electric blind was actually broke, I could see the sunlight coming in my bedroom, and I thought to myself, this is really early, it's only 6 a.m. But I actually struggled going back to sleep because there was so much light coming in my bedroom, and I started thinking about stuff, random stuff, and at some point I started thinking, what if I could talk to God directly? In the minute I started thinking this, I found myself completely paralyzed on my bed, and I started to think, crap, I cannot move. I cannot move my hand. And I remember my priest told me to do the sign of the cross to dispel any demonic influence, which I really tried so bad to do, but I was really paralyzed and I couldn't move an inch. I couldn't move my hand. Then I heard a really loud sound coming from outside my house. It was like the sound of thunder, kind of like during the Pentecost. Then I slowly started drifting through my bed, then through my floor. It felt like I was going through the floor, and at the same time I was getting teleported between my body and my other body, which was in the floor. I kept teleporting between my two bodies, and at the same time I was in a very dark place. And I closed my eyes and I started thinking, I'm going to wake up. This is just a bad dream. As stressed as I am, I'm probably gonna wake up soon because it's impossible to be so stressed in a dream, right? I start closing my eyes thinking I'm gonna wake up, but I notice I am still in this very dark place. And I start thinking to myself, man, I am in trouble. And when I look around, I can only see very dark gas. I was in a very dark place. I was above a pit and I could see the contour of the rocks. It was like a very narrow cliff. And then with my own ears, I could hear the sound of like being in a stadium. And you could hear the voice of maybe 10,000 or 100,000 people, not screaming loudly, but kind of mourning, as if they didn't have any strength, or as if they didn't drink or eat for a month, or as if they were forced to stand up for 1 month without being allowed to sit down. I was like floating and drifting slowly downward. I felt like some sort of veil was around me. Despite what people say in their health testimony, my eyes and my ears were not very acute. They didn't really feel like they were 100% acute. Things were going really fast, and at some point I just started praying, Lord, please take me out of here. And as soon as I think those words, I stopped drifting downward and I am slowly going back to my body. So going back from there, the first thing I think doing was to do the sign of the cross, because I was told by my priest that it will help dispel any demonic influence. And I started thinking, I really need to call my priest and ask him what's going on. But hold a second, I'm really stressed. Maybe I should wait a little bit just to calm down. And then I'm gonna call him. Maybe I just had a bad dream after all. The other thing I knew was that I knew all my sins very precisely. At some point there was a moment where I knew all of them in a very precise way, as if I was kind of judged by God and I knew for each little sin. As time goes, the human spirit is kind of weak and you start to forget about those memories of your sins. But I remember having a very acute knowledge of all my sins at that point. There was one other thing I knew, is that I really deserved to go to that place. Well, rather I felt like I belong there. I belong there and I have nothing to say. You know, when you watch those testimonies, people will say that they were sent there for a specific reason. If you look up on YouTube other people's testimonies about going to hell, you will find out that people talk about their dominant sin, and my dominant sin was being lukewarm. I considered myself being a serious Christian. I was striving to get baptism. I was still on my way to hell. I was still considered lukewarm. I would watch all those videos on YouTube about Christianity. I would gladly read the Bible, but I was still not doing enough. Can you imagine that? I would also fight with my family about going to church often, and I would try to find some time to pray, but still I was considered lukewarm. So I think it's been more than 2 years since I experienced that, and I think there was 2 reasons why I went there. The first reason was to uncover the ugly truth about my spiritual situation, and the second reason why I went there was to get rewarded, because I actually did 2 commandments accidentally. The first one was to honor my parents by not abandoning them, and the second commandment I did was to deny myself and pick up my cross. When I denied going to Japan, live a life of abundance in favor of taking care of my parents, this is basically what I did accidentally. You would think it's not a lot, but it actually gave me a lot of suffering, because I had this perfect plan of going to Japan and committing there, so it gave me a lot of suffering. And I believe it was also the approval of the Lord of me not going back there and live for myself. Now I understand why most people go to hell, is that because the bar is actually quite high. You need to do the commandments, you need to do the acts of charity, obey the words of Jesus as recorded in Matthew 5, 6, 7. We need to believe, but more importantly, we need to obey. We need to do acts of charity. turn away from sin and live holy. We need to love God with all our strength, and we need to love our neighbor as ourselves. On the day of judgment, we need to be clean. We need to work hard and strive hard. We need to live according to the commandments, do Matthew 5, 6, 7, and live holy. We need to work hard for salvation. The bloodshed on the cross will give you eternal life, but only if you do participate. We need to make sure to be pleasing to the Lord every day. We need to do the commandments and live holy. We need to make sure God knows us. Let's strive hard, dear friends, and maybe we will meet in heaven someday. Thank you for watching. If you found this video useful, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. This will help make this channel reach as many souls as possible. If you have any remark or topic you would like me to cover, please drop a comment below.